So we've looked at deliberate strategy. Now I want to refocus our attention on the emergent strategy part. So emergent strategies suggest that strategies emerge, so it's not deliberate, it emerges on the basis of a series of decisions which form a pattern that becomes clear over time. It's not an intentional process. We don't sit down and say, let's write the strategy. It just happens. The pattern of our strategy, what our strategy is, who we are, what we do, how we create value, emerges maybe through day-to-day operations. So we're going to look at 3 different ways that strategy can be emergent. So the first of these different ways to undertake emergent strategy is referred to as logical incrementalism. And logical incrementalism basically is the deliberate management of a bottom-up experimental basis. Basically, we're going to take step-by-step movements towards a strategy, learning, testing, making strategic options, step by step. So we make these partial commitments, step by step, one at a time, incrementally, rather than define an entire global total strategy. And we do this for 3 reasons. One, because in many cases we are in a highly uncertain environment. And we can't remove the uncertainty, so we have to manage it. And the best way to manage this uncertainty is to become more sensitive to the changes in our environment, to study the environment, and to make, as we've seen, small modifications and take strategic options as we better understand what's happening. The second thing we see is this reluctance to make very precise objectives too early, because precise objectives in a very uncertain environment will limit ideas. If we say this is what we want, this is a very specific goal, we need to get here, we're not seeing the whole picture. We may miss things. And so we fix relatively general goals. We open up different paths to the future. We open up potential opportunities. And this allows us to take advantage of changes that may occur in our environment, because we are in a highly complex, probably a highly uncertain environment. And obviously, it's based on this concept of experimentation. Step by step, move, test, try again, move, test, try again, and move incrementally, step by step. This is nice because logical incrementalism is based on making small changes. And small changes do not have as much resistance in an organization. We're doing things that are close to what we're doing already, and we're just moving a little bit. So change is easier. Now the danger, obviously, is with strategic drift. And we've studied this in the past, because we're within our existing culture, we're within our existing assumptions. We may not see some of the major things that are happening. We see some of the small changes in our environment, but we may not see the next big thing that's happening. And so because we're only making small modifications to what we do as we implement and design our strategy, we may miss a major change. And that's one of the dangers of incrementalism, is that we just move little steps at a time. And if the market doesn't make little steps and makes big steps, we may not react. And also, it's very important that we understand that top leaders facilitate this process. I mean, they really need to get on board and say, I need people to act and facilitate this incremental approach to strategy design. The second way we see emergent strategies developing, or the second major category, if we can, is through a political process. So we know that strategies emerge based on bargaining. In an organization, we have different business units, we have different actors, we have different VPs, we have coalitions that are formed within an organization. And we also have external political people that are acting and that are pushing the organization in one direction or the other. And so strategy emerges from this ongoing political debate of people that have power. They're bargaining, they're trying to move the organization step by step, little bit by little bit in a certain direction. And the strategy isn't, something we just sit down and decide. Again, it's emerging through this political back and forth of actors. Now, what's interesting about this is that ambitions and priorities of powerful people that are involved with this may take precedence. The goals of the people that are these politicians or people with high power, they may want to advance a certain strategy for their own personal benefit, or something that they believe the organization should do without looking deep into the facts. And so individual ambitions and priorities may take precedence, and that's one of the things we have to be careful of. I mean, there is abuse of power in politics that can happen. Politics can be good, and it can be very, very bad. And that's one of the dangers of this political process. It's most likely used, and it's most likely effective for gradual emergence of strategy like logical incrementalism. And why is that? Because political processes are based on compromise. And if somebody comes in to the debate and says, I want to change the strategic direction of the organization, we're going to go really far off and do something totally different, that individual knows that they won't get other people to agree. And politicians, if you're a good politician and you know how to play the political game, one of the first things you learn how to do is compromise. And so you'll give up some radical idea, and you'll accept something that's close to probably what already exists or what other people are already doing. And so because we're compromising, we're moving towards this middle ground. We're not looking at extreme solutions. And so because we compromise, we're not going to be making major changes in strategy. And the obvious second reason is because of the threat that change can promote. Power exists because of the current situation. If somebody's in power today, the current context basically gives them the power they have. How can I explain that? If you're a politician and you're currently, you've been voted in. You were voted in by people because of the situation, because of what you can do to improve a current situation, let's say. Well, if that situation changes, and if we do things that are too radical, your base of power, where you draw your power from, may disappear. So radical change, if we propose to do something that's very, very radical for an organization, there will be people that lose power. And this threat of change that induces loss of power basically makes it such that when we're involved with political processes, we don't again go towards big changes in the system, because big changes result in a loss of power, and the political actors want to maintain their power. Don't forget, politics can be a source of ideas. You can have people that come into the political process with very interesting, divergent ideas. And so a good political process should somehow facilitate the minority voice when possible. And lastly, structures and systems. We're organized, we have systems, we operate in certain ways. A company has a marketing department, a finance department, we have different divisions, we have different ways of making orders, we have different ways of managing sales. We have all of our structures and systems. And these structures and systems can actually focus the strategic reflection and strategic design. So strategy in this case becomes the outcome of managers, and these are often lower level managers, making sense of and dealing with problems on a day-to-day basis and applying established practices. So managers are going to look at strategy from their own lenses. They're going to basically say, hey, what are we doing today? What's going on in the environment? And what does that mean for my activities? And again, this is an emergent process. It's not as deliberate as logical incrementalism. Logical incrementalism is a deliberate process to cultivate this bottom-up experimental step-by-step process. This basically is saying, when we look at structures and systems, we're basically saying, hey, look, by doing our job day in, day out, we're undertaking reflection and review and redesign of our strategy. As operational managers, we're constantly trying to make sense of what we do in our day-to-day activities. And this approach basically integrates that. We're basically saying, what are you doing? What do you see happening in the environment? And what does it mean in your perspective for the strategy of the organization? So again, the systems that we've got can provide solutions to problems. We have multiple systems in an organization. They're going to all see maybe the same thing happening, but each of these systems may provide different solutions. And so at some point we need to bring them all together. Now this can be good because it may facilitate divergent ideas, but we have to remember that all of these different solutions may be quite varied from the different parts of the organization. And lastly, structures and systems will help a strategy emerge as different parts of the system and different parts of the organizational structure make decisions. We do need to understand, however, that these decisions are linked, and that as one part of the organization or one system makes a decision, it will result in a type of decision or a decision to be made by somebody else. And this is pretty basic, and this is what we call the continuity of decisions. And it's because we're on there's a dependency from one part of the organization to the next. If we launch a product in one system, that will impose decisions about marketing and investment, and that later will impose decisions about resource allocation, which will impose other decisions in terms of diversification, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So structures and systems will facilitate modification of strategy over time, but we also have to make sure that we do know that this path dependency, because one decision will result in a separate decision somewhere else in the system, may not be optimal. It may be suboptimal for the organization. What are the benefits of an emergent strategy? Obviously, we've mentioned this. Emergent strategies offer continual testing and modification as we move along. They allow us to sequence decisions as we move step by step. They give space to develop commitment of people, allow us to commit or to be engaged, but also to commit little bit by little bit resources that may be very rare. They allow us to learn from different subsystems. what works, and how does it work from your perspective. As we mentioned, small changes are less likely to incur resistance. On the flip side, we know that these small changes may push towards strategic drift. And continual readjustment of strategy does make sense in complex dynamic environments. Okay, so lastly, what I'd like to do is I'd like to look at strategy development processes that we've seen and under what context maybe each of these processes works better. So we're going to look at the context of the organization. We're going to look at it from two axes. We're going to look at the degree of complexity of the environment. Is it a simple environment or is it complex? So is it difficult to understand? And the second axe would be the level of uncertainty in the environment that we have. So our first case would be a situation where we have a simple to understand environment and there's very little uncertainty. So it's a very static environment. So in this situation, we can look to the past for solutions. There's not a lot of turbulence, there's not much changing. Past experience will tell us everything we need to know probably about what to do tomorrow. There's little change going on. And strategic planning is very feasible in an organization in this setting. And we can even use central planners to take the lead. There's not a lot of need to discover what's happening in the environment and different points of view and whatnot. It's pretty stable. I mean, we don't have to be constantly seeking external points of view. The next would be an organization that finds itself in a very dynamic environment. In a dynamic environment where you have a lot of uncertainty, okay, you say, what's going to happen tomorrow? I have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. You're going to want to use systems that are based on scenario planning, where you're looking at the environment, you're involving people that understand the environment that they're involved with. So an organization has managers at different levels and has people that are interacting with customers and with the environment. These people need to get involved. These people are close to the action. They see the changes underway and can facilitate better understanding of potential scenarios. How is this all going to play out? And in this case, logical incrementalism and organizations that learn effectively are very appropriate in scenario planning and organizations that are in a dynamic context. And our last group would be organizations that are very complex, okay? And when you're in a complex environment, it's hard to understand everything. You can't assume that some person at the top of the organizations understands all of the intricacies and complexities of what's going on. It just doesn't work. And so structural solutions may be more important here. Getting different people involved in the organization, transferring strategy down to lower levels may be best. And this is what we were speaking of before about emergent strategies and based on structures. They know what's going on. So we want to devolve the strategy process down to lower levels in the organization and to make sure that innovation comes about, because again, this is an emergent process and some of the dangers will be that we don't seek out radical ideas. We want to use probably corporate venturing or entrepreneurship as policies to promote innovation. Lastly, a few final words. Don't forget that strategies that are realized are not maybe what we had planned. There's a lot of unrealized strategies out there. Strategies that we define may not be executed, specifically with deliberately defined strategies. They may be difficult to implement because the environment has changed or something's happened in the organization. There's a lot of reasons why strategies, in particular deliberate strategies, will not be executed. Getting people on board wasn't done properly, or the organization have the skills, etc. So we got to make sure that we are aware that these deliberate strategies may not be executed, and we have to monitor the criteria for execution. Secondly, effective deliberate strategies should, or when we define a deliberate strategy more top-down, we definitely need to seek feedback from others to adjust and get people on board. We need to listen to performance indicators and adjust. We also need to know that a deliberate strategy that's a very radical decision may require cultural change. So we need to listen to the people that are implementing the strategy. We need to listen and get feedback and adjust from the people. Otherwise, again, it won't be seen it'll be seen as very top-down, totally disassociated with the organization, its culture, and not taking into consideration a lot of execution factors. Thirdly, emergent strategies can be managed. This is like managed creativity. These emergent strategies happen step by step. One of the key things you want to do as a leader in an organization is provide vision and clarity and strategic intent. Explain what are we doing in our organization to facilitate this bottom-up approach. If you're doing something that you get a lot of people involved with, one of the key roles that management has is to fix a vision, fix a mission, and define processes. And lastly, as I mentioned before, emergent strategies are prone to strategic drift. So make sure you challenge people involved, get them to challenge some of the core assumptions, get them to understand the cultural shifts that may be required in the organization. The context may be changing very fast on the outside, and they need to discover these changes.